Australia before, so this is a big treat for us. Sydney's our first stop. So far we fell in love with Sydney and had a good tour of the city. Went to the Opera House just to do a tour and found out that Vladimir Ashkenazi was conducting that night, so we got tickets immediately. And our first night in Australia, we're listening to Vladimir Ashkenazi conducting. That's like, how do you start a trip any better than that? I'm a classical music nut, so that'll clue you in. But I do want to say thanks to Keith. Keith kind of got this whole thing rolling, and then Morgan picked up the ball and helped keep it going, so that's why we're here tonight. And I am happy to announce that Sex and God just came out on audiobooks. Just today is the first day it's available. God Virus has been out on audiobook for some time. And of course, I need to make a quick announcement, an unpaid political announcement here for the organization that I founded back in 2009. How many are familiar with Recovering from Religion, the organization? Oh, good. So quite a few of you are. Well, we're an international group. We've even got some groups starting up here in Australia, although don't ask me where right now. I turned the reins over last year to Sarah Moorhead and Jerry DeWitt. How many have heard of Jerry DeWitt? Oh, okay, good, yeah. Anyway, Jerry just recently resigned, and Sarah took over as our executive director. But anyway, Recovering from Religion, if you're interested in it, get online. We're starting groups all over the world. We've got about 150 groups, even have groups, underground groups in India, in Bangladesh, and we got a new group just started in London about 6 months ago. And we also have, as a subset of our organization, Secular Therapy Project, and we actually have some therapists from Australia that are registered with us. It's a project to make sure if you go to a therapist, they're secular. They're not going to send you back to church, and they're not going to pray with you, and they're not going to help you get your chakras realigned either. No New Age kind of crap. If it's not evidence-based. So just look at our database, seculartherapy.org, and see if that's something you're interested in. And we have recently started doing something. I've started working with the American Humanist Association, reaching out to teens and kids on atheism. Now, nobody's really ever done this before because it's kind of taboo. You never tell kids about being an atheist. Well, we're going to break that taboo, and so I've been writing a column for the American Humanist Association called Ask an Atheist. And we get teenagers from all over the world. I've had teenagers, Muslim teenagers in Turkish Muslim schools asking me questions. They're atheists, but they don't dare tell they don't dare say it or anything. And we've got questions from the UK, of course, questions from all over Canada and the United States. And I think we even have one kid that asked a question from Australia. So here's, if you're interested in some of the stuff I talk about and hearing more about the ideas that I'll be talking about tonight, or areas that I don't get to cover, you might want to listen to some podcasts, one of which is by a guy you probably heard about, Jake Farr-Wharton. I mean, you know Jake and his podcast. Well, I was on there just Imaginary Friends just about 3 weeks ago. And yeah, Atheist Experience. I was trying to remember your name. I forgot. Jenny. I should have remembered that. Welcome. Come on in. Hello. Jenny and I were talking about, I've been on the Atheist Experience. How many of you watched the Atheist Experience? Oh, good. I love that show. I love Matt Dillahunty. He and I have become quite good friends over the last 3 or 4 years. And one of the more interesting podcasts I just did was Life on the Swing Set. And it's a podcast out of Chicago, and it's ostensibly for people who are swingers. Now, I know no atheist would ever be a swinger. So a couple weeks ago, and then did a podcast number 7 out of India, the Boondocks, Cosmic Boondocks. Fun to talk to former Hindus about sexuality, or about sex and God. All right, so we have to start. This is a picture I took last year at the American Atheist Convention in Washington, D.C. after the Reason Rally, which you may have heard about, and in which I spoke. But I almost always start my talks with a prayer. So I am the high priest of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. How many of you are members of my church? Okay, there's only one high priest, and you have now met him, folks. Make the checks out, $50 per year to me, Darrel Ray. Okay? All right, so bow your heads if you're an FSM member. You bow your heads. The rest of you, I don't care what you do. Dear Flying Spaghetti Monster, we thank you for giving us sex and sexuality, whether homosexual or heterosexual, bi or trans, and for not making us like those uptight Christians, Muslims, Mormons, and Baptists. We thank you for wonderful masturbatory fantasies and for the pornography upon which they're often based. FSM, we ask that you grant us sex partners, lovers, wives, husbands that know where our G-spot, our clitoris, and the sweet spot on our penis is. Grant us long, loving foreplay with deep, wet kisses and huge orgasms, followed by loving cuddles after. Grant us the courage and the wisdom to communicate openly and honestly with our partners and to give them more pleasure than we receive, for we know it is far better to give than to receive. Your noodliness. We do not need 72 virgins. In fact, we ask that you send us no virgins, for we don't want to have to train them. Of course, unless they're very willing to be trained. We're especially pleased today that you send us no repressed Christian virgins, male or female, for they will only feel guilty and cause great problems with their abstinence-only training. Your posthumous. We ask that you give us the wisdom to understand and appreciate our partner's kinks, or lack thereof, whether foot worship or spanking, ropes or talking dirty. Help us to appreciate their full sexuality, and lead us not into temptation and judgment of others, and scorn when their sexual preferences are not ours. We do ask in the name of Raman for retribution, shame, and scorn on pedophile priests, hypocritical ministers sleeping with the choir director, and gay-bashing closeted ministers, etc. O Spaghetti-O, we ask that you send condoms and birth control in abundance, and your many blessings to the dedicated workers at the Trojan Condom Factory and Planned Parenthood. In the name of Dan Savage and Greta Christina, we pray, for they are the true gods and goddesses of this world. Do I hear a ramen?
Ramen.
All right, ramen. Thank you. Well, so tonight we're going to talk about, I like to set the mood a little bit, we're going to talk about sex and sexuality from a perspective that I write about in Sex and God. But just to give you a quick overview, Sex and God deals with a wide spectrum of ideas and concepts. When I first began doing the research for Sex and God, I thought, I'll have a chapter or two, an article or two. I was even myself surprised by the vast amount of information that nobody had ever written about. I really deeply researched in the literature. I could find no books ever written on this subject, which tells you something. It tells you the ability of religion to blind us to the obvious. Now, don't get me wrong. Muslims and Christians are always writing books about sex and God. It's just not scientific in any particular way, for sure. But I write about other cultures and what those cultures did or did not use with respect to religion. I also write about human personality and dog personalities. Wow, what would dog personalities tell us about sex and religion? Well, there's a lot there. But tonight, we're going to focus on a small part of the book around evolutionary biology. And I title this Sex and God topic, What the Pope Doesn't Know About Evolution. So, there is evidence throughout your body of evolution, whether it's men's breasts or women's breasts, whether it's the shape of the penis, the shape of the vagina, the chemistry of the vagina, the viscosity of the semen, the different kinds of viscosity. I better take my costume off here. I'm no longer speaking as the official Pastafarian. I'm sorry. Getting a little hot up there. So, even the sounds a woman makes when she's having an orgasm. Now, guys, even that is evidence of evolution. It's going on. So, let's begin by asking a simple question. How many of you masturbate? I do. In fact, I do a lot. Many times. If you raise both hands, those are the ambidextrous masturbators. There's only a few liars in this group, I noticed, but there are some liars, it appears to me. Imagine asking that question in a church. Imagine asking that question in a Catholic, after a Catholic Mass, or in a Baptist church, or in a Muslim church, or in a Mormon church. You would get no hands raised. And well over half of you raised your hands here, and the others are still programmed, I'm thinking. There's just not that many people that don't masturbate. Now, there are some, don't get me wrong. I absolutely know there are. But just can't imagine that an entire Baptist church doesn't masturbate. If I asked that question in a Baptist church, nobody would raise their hand. And we all know they're doing it. And therein is kind of the hint of where we're going to go towards the end of my talk tonight. Masturbation is a biological imperative. And I've done a lot of research around this, and here's a graph that will help you understand the difference between male masturbation and female masturbation, by the way. Study that very carefully. Am I wrong? Correct me if I am. Okay, so what we're going to learn today is what the Pope does not know about sexuality, which is about everything, of course. It's a very easy topic to talk about with respect to our dear friend, the Pope. So we're going to begin with sex organs. Sex organs are among the most rapid components of any organism. One organ that's evolving the fast. Come on in and join us.
Sorry.
It's just starting to get hot and sexy in here right now. So, sex organs are constantly evolving, and a fellow named Carl Linnaeus discovered this back in the 1700s. He is the father of what we now know as scientific classification. That's why we have the words Homo sapien in the description of us, and among other things. He used that methodology. So Carl Linnaeus got called a sex maniac, a sex fiend. He was obsessed with sex because he always wanted to look at sex organs. And here's the sex organs he was looking at. Or this one. Or this one. These are all sex organs. And some of these sex organs are very closely related. They're very closely related, and yet they can look very different. Judy and I went on a tour of an orchid forest, I guess you could say. It was in the middle of Panama about 3 years ago, and they took us through this little, I don't know, botanical zoo for orchids. And there's 200 different orchids in this little place. It's not very big. I'd say it's not much bigger than this room. And they're in these big giant trees, and they're growing beautifully in here. But orchids are all very closely related, and yet the sex organs of all these orchids were radically different. I mean, it's amazing how much the difference can be between one orchid and the next one sitting right next to it, and their DNA is hardly any different than between, say, you and I and a bonobo or a chimpanzee. They're very closely related oftentimes. Sex organs are always changing and evolving, and we'll learn why. So now we've seen plant sex organs. Well, plants are a great example because they come from Carl Linnaeus and the early exploration and classification. You can classify a flowering plant just by its sex organs. You could almost do the same thing with animals. You can almost classify an animal by its sex organ too. And we'll look at a few of them. Now we're going to begin with a little bird called the Argentine bluebill. And this guy is an amazing bird. It's been studied because of its penis. Now, if you're sensitive about pornography, this is the time to leave. Or at least close your eyes, okay? We're going to see a little duck porn here next. So if you're concerned, I'm going to show it to you twice so you really get into it, okay? So you're going to look at it. This next, it's a little film. It's only about 10 seconds long. But you have to watch, and it's slowed down 10 times. So what you're going to get ready to see is 10 times slower than it would be in nature. So watch carefully. Watch. There you go. All right. One more time. Can't get enough of this duck porn. Look at that sucker. It's 17 centimeters long. That duck's only 20 centimeters long, probably. This guy is the John Holmes of ducks. Now, if you're laughing at that, that tells me a whole lot right there. You know who John Holmes is. So, ducks have enormous penises. And, by the way, guys, it doesn't look like yours, I'm not thinking. It's corkscrewed, isn't it? And that penis runs off the lymph system. Humans, mammals, run their penises off of the blood pressure system. This guy has a penis inside, and when he's ready to evert, that means get a hard on, he pushes it out. He literally pushes it out like blowing a balloon up. And that is 10 times slower than it would normally happen. They can get it up, get it in, and get it out really, really quickly. So, ducks, the duck penis is huge. It's corkscrewed. It runs off the lymphatic system, and there's a lot of differences. And ducks lose their penis every year. I mean, why carry that big thing around if you don't need it? So they lose it every year, and then they grow a new one, next year when it's time to start mating. Now, the interesting thing is, if there's a lot of male competition, the most dominant males will grow the biggest penises. The less dominant males will grow smaller penises, and they will absorb them back into their body sooner because they're not getting many opportunities to mate, or any at all. So there's a real selection process. You don't make a big one. You wait till next year. If there's not much competition, then you can grow a big one. They have some social control because ducks look around at the social environment and kind of decide, do I grow a big one this year or not? Why waste all that energy? So it's kind of interesting. I don't think they think that consciously. At least the ducks I've seen haven't. But I had ducks. I had ducks in my pond for several years. I had 2 swans, 3 geese, and 7 ducks. And what I noticed was the poor female ducks were always getting hit on by the males. But the female ducks, the female likes one guy, and she'll just kind of waddle real sexy in front of the guy, and he'll get the idea. He'll mount her. Of course, that's pretty fast. It's over in no time at all. But the other guys are watching, and they see, uh-oh, he got some, I want some too, and they jump on her, and they'll rape a female duck. And it is rape. 3 or 4 male ducks will jump on and try to have intercourse with a female duck, and she is struggling, she's squawking, she'll do anything she can to get away from them. I've even seen female ducks go underneath the water, and I've heard that they will drown trying to get away from other ducks. Now, a female duck, or any duck, can stay underwater quite a long time. So that's quite bad if you're drowning trying to get away. But for years, biologists wondered, why is there so much rape in the duck world? Why do males have corkscrew penises? Why do males grow such big penises? Why do they get in and out so fast? All these questions were asked, and nobody had the answer. They kept looking at the male's physiology and trying to figure out what would cause this. What's the evolutionary background of it? Until one day, a woman, biologist out of the University of Edinburgh, came up with a brilliant idea. Let's look at the female's physiology. So she dissected the female reproductive tract, and lo and behold, she found some really interesting things that explained it all quite easily. Here's what she found. She found that this is what the female vagina looks like in a duck. This is what the male penis looks like. Now, the really interesting thing is the male penis corkscrews the wrong direction. Her vagina goes the opposite direction of what the male penis goes. Wow, that's kind of interesting. So she did some experiments with males. She, masturbated them, and she got them to ejaculate in each of these things. And she found that a male could easily ejaculate here and pretty deeply. She could easily ejaculate there pretty deeply, but if it was the opposite direction or quirked in some way, he couldn't ejaculate very easily. So what she found was in the females, there was all sorts of little pockets throughout the vagina that could capture and stop semen from getting in there. So the question then came to her mind, if we've got all this rape, who is actually fathering the baby ducks? So she did DNA testing of the ducks out of the female, and she found that 97% of all the babies produced by that female duck were fathered by the guy she liked. Only 3% were fathered by the rapists. In other words, I'm from Missouri area, Todd Aiken, you may have heard of him. The female duck can shut that whole thing down. You guys remember that? Did that make it into Australia?
Yes.
That guy lives 100 miles from where I live. We're full of crazies in the place that I come from. I'm in Kansas. That's where the Westboro Baptist Church is. Wichita, where I grew up, where they murdered the latest, the abortion doctor. It's pretty crazy in my state. So anyway, how did I get off on that? All right. So don't get this wrong, women cannot shut that whole thing down, as Todd Aiken said. And I'm not about to tell Todd Aiken about ducks, because he might take that information wrong. So we now learn all sorts of cool stuff. That the female reproductive tract is capable of stopping the male from fertilizing. So all these males are raping, and yet they're not getting to the egg. Only 3% are getting to the egg. And she's controlling who gets deepest and farthest in her reproductive tract. But we see all this crazy stuff going on between the male sex organ and the female sex organ. But it's not that crazy. In fact, it's incredibly common. It's almost as common as there are animals on the face of this planet. And we call that antagonistic coevolution. And it's a word in biology that explains what's going on between the sex organs. This is not just a competition between males to get females. It's a competition for females to control who actually gets to the egg. So we've got all this competition. There's lots of different kinds of competition that we see in antagonistic coevolution. Every species on this planet that is sexual has a reproductive strategy. And that reproductive strategy includes the sex organs. So sex organs are always changing, just like we saw in the flowers. And we'll see this in a little bit, how much sex organs have actually changed in a very short period of time. Here are sex organs of a variety of mammalian species, large mammalian species. And you could see, you could almost just, if you were well trained, you could look at the penis and say, oh, that's a cow, that's a gorilla, that's a whatever, and you could just look at them and probably classify, or come close to classifying the animal just by its penis. Now, here's one that you guys will all relate to. I'm sure you've seen them walking around here, the spiny anteater. How many of you have seen a spiny anteater around? You haven't? Yeah, I saw one in the zoo just yesterday. We went to the koala zoo and they had one there. I didn't see his penis there, but I now have a picture of it. He has 4 heads. I mean, the poor guy, if he thinks with his little head, he's in big trouble, isn't he? You guys do know that joke here and there. Okay. Sometimes humor doesn't cross an ocean. I've noticed that when I went to Europe. The English just don't have the sense of humor that I have anyway. So this guy has 4 heads, and it ejaculates out of these 2, and it alternates. So this time when he has sex, he squirts his semen out of this side. The next time he squirts it out of that side. These 2 don't actually ejaculate any semen. Why he has 4 heads, who knows? Nobody really knows. But we can tell, I mean, that's a pretty crazy penis, isn't it? 4 different ways, 4 different aspects to it. So we can see that sex is actively evolving in all sorts of animals, including us, the great apes. There's 4 great apes, and don't come up to me and say, well, you didn't include the gibbons, because I'm not including, not the gibbons, the orangutans. Thank you. Appreciate that. I just drew a really big blank there. Yeah, because I don't count them. They're not as closely related to us as the other 4. Some people count orangutans, but so I'm not doing that tonight. There's 4 great apes. We got the gorillas. We have the chimpanzees. We're going to talk a lot about all of them. We're going to talk about the bonobos, and we've got the humans. So of these 4 groups that are all very closely related to us, we will find out that size matters, and it matters a lot. Here's a relative positioning of penis sizes according to the group you just saw up here. Now, which one of these penises is the gorilla's size? You cheated. You read my book already. Yeah, that's the gorilla's. That's the gorilla's right there. A gorilla has a teeny tiny penis. You don't need a big penis, and we'll find out why later. But you do need a big body if you're a gorilla. Gorilla's size matters, but not penis size. If you're a bonobo or a chimp, this is the size of your penis. Bonobo or a chimp. And it's relatively large for the size of the animal. But this is humans, and we are the John Holmes of the primate world, by the way. We have large penises relative to our body size. So each primate, as we'll see here, has a sexual style and a sexual strategy. And these strategies, we'll go through them one by one. The first one is the gorilla. As we saw, size matters. Because in the gorilla world, gorillas tend to dominate a few females, 3 or 4 females, the silverback. And if you're not a big silverback male, you're probably not going to get any harem. And they do have harems. So they're very polygynous. Now, polygynous in anthropological terms means many wives, one male, many females. They have a high degree of sexual dimorphism. Now, sexual dimorphism is the difference between the sizes of the 2 genders. So you look at an elephant seal that's 4 or 5 times bigger than any of the females. Just by looking at the difference in size, you can tell if that species is polygynous or not. One male dominating many females. Look at the bovines. You know, a big bull. They can be gigantic. They can be twice as big as the cows in a herd. So one male dominating many females. Well, that's what happens in the gorilla world. One gorilla tends to dominate 3 or 4 females, and tends to dominate a larger group. There may be other silverbacks in the group, but each silverback has his own harem. But there's also some blackbacks around, and they don't get anybody unless they can entice a lady to go into the woods for a minute or 2, which does happen. But they've got their sex only lasts for about a minute. Now think about that, 1 minute, and they only have sex once a month, because they only have sex when the female is in heat. They have very small testes. Gorillas have testes that are half the size of humans. That's pretty tiny, because you don't need a big penis, and you don't need lots of semen, and you don't need lots of sperm. If you're only mating once a month, only when the female's in heat, and you're the guy that controls these females. You know, nobody else is going to screw around with you if you're the big silverback. You hope. So, also females, here's the interesting thing about gorillas, is the female can leave. You know, if she gets tired of the guy, she goes find some other silverback. And generally, female gorillas stay with a single silverback for maybe 3 to 5 years, and then they move on, you know, find another husband or whatever. So it's really fluid. He doesn't have a harem in the sense of he controls them and forces them to have sex with him. He has a harem because they joined him voluntarily. So it's all voluntary among gorillas anyway. But what we've just seen here among gorillas is a fairly, I've really gotten your funny bone. I am sorry, but that's fine. That's fine. I'm glad I'm making you laugh. So the poor, oh, he's making you laugh. Oh, you want to come up here and talk? So these sexual strategies, what we're going to talk about, the one we see tonight in the gorillas, is a very common sexual strategy. You know, it's very common among a lot of different animals to have one male that dominates all the several females, and they only mate during estrus, when the female's actually in heat in some way. But sex can be repurposed. Gorillas are very traditional. If you think about sex, gorillas are the most traditional sexual group of the primates, of the great apes, I'm sorry. But sex can be repurposed for other things besides reproduction. It can be used for dominance hierarchies. It can be used to create bonding. It can be used to create stress reduction and to reduce conflict, as we'll see here a little bit later. None of those have anything to do with actually having babies. So sex takes on a function that's different than having babies. So let's talk about the chimp. Chimps are multi-mate species. One male might mate with multiple females. One female might mate with multiple males. Multi-mate species. But it's hierarchically based. There's in a chimp group, there's 2 or 3 chimps at the top, male chimps, that dominate the whole tribe, the whole troop. And the females try to mate during estrus, but they only mate during estrus. Females mate with the top males. Females want to mate with the senior, with the most high status males in the troop. Females do not necessarily want to mate with the low status males. I mean, why have a baby with a low status guy? He's not going to protect your babies. So they tend to mate multiple times. When they're in estrus, the males, the top 2 or 3 males will mate with perhaps most of the females. Not all, because even the high status males don't want to mate with the lowest status females. So you get that kind of dynamic going on. And we can see here that sex is not for reproduction. It's for maintaining status. It's changed. It's repurposed, if you will. But these folks, the chimps, have fairly large penises, extremely large testes. They're twice the size of humans, and they produce copious amounts of semen. And the sex only lasts for 30 seconds. It's even less than what the gorillas do. Now let's look at bonobos. Bonobos, girls will be girls. Among the bonobos, the females rule the roost. It's the opposite in some ways of the chimps. Opposite in a good way in this sense. There's a committee of 2 or 3 females that come together and rule the whole tribe. Females in the bonobo tribe, when they become sexually active, sexually mature, have to leave the troop and go find another troop. Males stay with their mothers for their entire life. So the males of the troop stay inside the troop, where the females have to leave the troop. Therefore, you see a very strong bonding between mothers and sons within the bonobo tribe. And the sons get their status from their mother's status. So if the mother is the high status chimp or bonobo in the group, then that's where the son gets his status from. They mate anytime they darn well please. Bonobos have hidden estrus. That means you cannot just look at a female bonobo, and tell if they're in heat, if they're in estrus or not. For a chimpanzee female her butt swells and lights up like a red billboard saying, "I am ready to mate, guys." That's what chimps do, but you don't see that in the bonobos. The bonobo females redden just a little bit, become a little more pink. But that is not an advertisement because they're having sex all the time. Bonobos are an incredibly sexual species. And they have repurposed sex for many different things. They've repurposed it for bonding. They've repurposed it for stress management. They've repurposed it for pleasure. Now here's what goes on with bonobos. If you were an observer of bonobo sexology, you would find that there's just as much sex between 2 females, between 2 males, between males and females as there is any other combination. In fact, the most common sexual act among bonobos is between females, female to female. Because, remember I told you the female has to leave the tribe? Well, how does she find and how does she get into another tribe? She leaves her tribe and goes and finds the senior female, the high status female in another tribe, and what does she do? She grooms her and performs sexual favors for her. They love to screw. And you'll see bonobos in every position you can imagine having fun, whether they're males or females or males and females. If a predator comes along and everybody's huddled together hoping the predator leaves, nobody gets eaten, when the danger is past, what happens? The bonobos have an orgy. Everybody screws somebody else. If I'm walking through the forest and I find a beautiful fruit tree with all sorts of fruit ready to eat, I don't eat anything. I jump up and down and holler and say, "Fruit's over here, fruit's over here," and then we all have an orgy before we eat. Imagine that. You have to screw before you eat in the bonobo world. If 2 bonobos get in a fight, they have a conflict. When the conflict is over, what do? You have sex. What else is there to do if you're a bonobo? They're having a lot of fun as bonobos. It controls stress. It bonds. It keeps people together. It provides a way to deal with conflict. I mean, gosh, have you ever been in a fight with your sex partner or your spouse, and you had sex later and it sure made things a lot better? We could be better as bonobos if we just took a lesson or 2 from them. So, now sex doesn't last that long, but it does, if you have a lot of it, who cares? You can have a lot of sex there. So, here's a comic I found. Says he's at the zoo, and he says here that bonobo society's females are in charge, and sex rather than violence is used to keep order. And she says, "Well, thank God we've evolved." So here's a picture of the bonobos. This is actually 2 females making love. A female's clitoris is about as big as my little finger. They're huge. They're as big as a small penis. And they love to rub penises together. And according to Frans de Waal, one of the world's experts on bonobo, Frans de Waal says it looks like they're having an orgasm because they look just like a human female when she's having an orgasm. It even makes some sounds that sound like human females when they're having orgasms. Guys, that look like yours? That's the bonobo male penis. It doesn't look like yours, does it? If you just hold your index finger out like that, that's what a bonobo penis looks like. Not like ours, and not like the chimps, because they have a different mating strategy. The chimps and the bonobos have a flush them out strategy. That means produce copious amounts of semen and sperm and inject them into the female every time you have sex. And what you're trying to do is flush out the other guy, because they're mating with they're having lots of sex. Chimps and bonobos mate a lot of times. So you got to flush the other guy out before he gets to the egg. Otherwise, you're going to lose in that genetic evolutionary game. So imagine this. I just want you to think. Imagine a homeschool, fundamentalist, creationist Sunday school class going to the zoo and seeing the bonobos French kissing in missionary style and fucking like bunny rabbits. I think that would mess up the lesson plan for that day, don't you? They do love missionary style. In fact, that's the preferred sexual position of bonobos. Not doggy style, which is the preferred sexual position of the chimps. So, gosh, isn't this interesting information? Aren't you just having fun listening to this? I can't get enough of this stuff. All right. Rapid sexual change is seen we've seen it in the penis, we've seen it in all sorts of places in the vagina, but Science News just last year said this. When scientists compared 1,880 proteins encoded by genes from humans and rodents, a number of proteins involved in reproduction ranked among those with the greatest number of changes. 3 are directly involved in sperm-egg interaction. In other words, this is genetic proof that our sexuality is rapidly evolving. Faster than almost anything else in our genome are our sexual components of our sexuality. So this is really interesting news. It means we're constantly evolving. We have changed a lot since we first parted from our common ancestor with the chimps, bonobos, and certainly a lot from the gorillas. So now let's look at humans. We've looked at the other 3 great apes. Let's look at our human friends. And we're going to see a lot of antagonistic coevolution. Remember I talked about flush them out strategy with the bonobos and the chimps. Well, that's antagonistic in the sense of male against male. If we look inside, we would also see that chimps and bonobos have different kinds of sperm. And those sperm are themselves doing things like fighting each other. Chimp A, if Chimp A's semen finds Chimp B's semen inside of Jennifer, then they're going to fight. And they're going to fight to the death. Sperm kill other sperm. Sperm block other sperm. There's a coagulant in the sperm of chimps and the sperm of bonobos and in humans that actually creates a blockage, a coagulated block like blood clotting at the opening of the cervix, and it stops other semen from being able to get up, stops sperm from being able to get up. Isn't that interesting? So we've got a fight among the sperm. More interesting is there's a protein in some sperm that allow for the dissolving of the block. So it's an arms race. Can you see the arms race going back and forth? First you war and you fight other sperm. Then you try and block the other sperm. Try to swim. There's actually 3 different kinds of sperm inside of bonobos, chimps, and humans. We've got it all too. We have sperm that actually fight other sperm. We have sperm that creates blockage. Guys, now I know most of you don't masturbate, but if you did, you probably have noticed that not long after that semen comes out, it's really sticky. It's really sticky really fast. Do I see any heads nodding there? Yeah. That's the coagulant happening. You're trying to stop. If that was in the vagina, that would be happening inside of her body, and it slows down the next guy that might be getting in there. Now, Why would you need that if we're a monogamous species? Just asking the question. I'd like the Pope to answer that question for me. So here's some things we can answer as we talk about tonight, although I'm not going to answer all of these. Why is the human penis so large? You obviously don't need a big one if you're a gorilla. Why do humans have such big ones? Why is the human penis shaped so different from the other great apes? Why does human sex last so long? Now, even if it's a quickie, guys, it's going to be longer than 30 seconds or a minute most of the time. Why do humans have testes larger than gorillas, but smaller than bonobos or chimps? Why does human sperm have different kinds of sperm? Why do women have hidden menstruation? You cannot look at a woman and say, oh yeah, she's menstruating today. You can't look at a bonobo and tell that, but you can look at a chimpanzee, and you can look at a lot of other species and tell if they're in heat or not. Why is the female reproductive tract so hostile to sperm? Ladies, you are devastating to sperm. You actually, you're designed to kill sperm. It is actually hard, actually difficult to get pregnant as a human being. It is difficult to get pregnant as a bonobo. It's difficult to get pregnant as a chimpanzee. We have trouble getting pregnant as a species, and there's reasons for that. Now, you may not think you have trouble, but just compare it to your dog. How many of you have ever mated a dog, bred a dog? Yeah, it only takes once, maybe twice, and they are pregnant. Now, of course, sometimes with all this inbreeding we have with dogs, that's a problem too. But animals usually do it the first time, because when they're in heat, that's when they're reproducing. We'll come back to that in a minute. Why do women have breasts? Why do bonobos have breasts? Bonobos have breasts. They're roughly a size A, but they are breasts. Chimps do not have breasts. They're as flat as a man. All right. So everything we see in humans, we can find in other species. I mean, we see breasts in humans, but we can see breasts in bonobos. We see large penises in humans. We can see large penises in cattle, for example. But so we can see all these in other species, but humans have their own unique strategy. So we've got a unique strategy that's different than chimps, bonobos, or gorillas, or in fact any other species on the planet. So we've evolved our own sexual characteristics. And here's one of them we've evolved. This is the human penis. Now this one should look reasonably like yours, guys, if you looked at it closely enough. You'll notice it's got some characteristics right there. That is not a bonobo penis. That is a human penis. And it's made for a very specific reason like this. A fellow named Robin Baker out of the University of Manchester in England. I don't know why all the sex research is happening in England. I guess it's because George Bush was president for the last 8 or so years. Before that, he stopped all sex research. In the United States anyway. But England seems to be doing some of this. Robin Baker said there's got to be a reason why the penis is shaped that way. And he thought and he thought and he thought. So he went down to the local porn shop. And Keith informs me that our hotel is right in the middle of the porn area. And indeed, I could see 20 porn shops from my hotel room. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't on purpose. But that's what we're doing after we're dry hunting. We're going to the porn shop. Okay. So anyway, he went to the porn shop. He got one of those vaginas, fake vaginas. You guys know you can get those these days. And he got a dildo that had a normal human shape. And he took liquid of the viscosity of semen. Now, semen actually has multiple viscosities. So he chose the 3 most common viscosities of semen, injected them into the human vagina, fake human vagina, and he put the dildo in and just pumped it. And you know what happened? 80%. 80% of the semen was pumped out. Now, isn't that interesting? Why would the human penis go to the trouble of getting shaped so they can pump semen out? Then he also got to thinking, wow, that explains something else. If you're pumping, it takes a while to pump. If you're a chimp, you're flushing. It doesn't take any time to flush. You just stick your penis in, shoot as much semen as you can in there, and hope it flushes the other guy out. But if you're a human, you put it in there and you pump and you pump and you pump because you're trying to suck the other guy out. Gives new meaning to the word blowjob, doesn't it? Kind of reverse, I guess. All right, you guys are a tough audience. So he discovered, and he's the first one to discover this, the human penis's shape and the purpose of the shape appears to be to pump semen out. Now the interesting thing is, guys, when you ejaculate, what happens immediately after? No, you don't go to sleep. Before you go to sleep.
Cigarette.
There's always a wise thing. Yeah, okay. What happens immediately after you're finished?
Cry.
There's not much sex happening in this group, I can tell. You go flaccid, don't you? You don't want to pump your own semen out. The minute you ejaculate, you generally speaking, start going flaccid because you don't want to pump your own semen out. Your purpose was to pump the other guy out, and it takes a while, 4 to 10 minutes of pumping to get the other guy out of the vagina of the female that you're having sex with at that moment. Now, does that sound like a monogamous species to you? Interesting, because women are always saying, they didn't have that many sex partners. How many times have you heard that? Well, that was another little piece of puzzle that comes out of the University of Toronto in Canada. Some psychologists noticed that, let's just pull numbers out of the air. Men said they had, you ask a man how many sex partners you had in your life, and they'll say 10. I'm just pulling this out of the air. I don't have the actual numbers. You ask a woman how many sex partners they had, and 2, 3. So, that doesn't sound possible, does it? I mean, unless the prostitutes are getting a hell of a lot of business, that's not possible. There should be a roughly equal. So they devised this brilliant scheme. They brought people in and asked them questions face to face with researchers. Men in one-on-one and women in one-on-one. And they ask them how many sex partners he had, and they get those answers. Then they changed it. They hand them a piece of paper and say, go in that room and answer these questions. One of which was, how many sex partners have you had? If the interview was not face-to-face, women admitted to twice as many sex partners as they admitted to in the face-to-face situation. So now they walk out, they hand their paper to the researcher, and they leave, and it says, I had 5 sex partners in my life, but the guy still says I had 10. The guys don't change. The number of sex partners is the same. So then they came with this, I think this is just stunningly brilliant. They put the ladies, and the men too, on lie detector machines. Then they asked them the questions. Thinking they were going to get caught in a lie, the men answered the same. 10. Women, thinking they could get caught in a lie, answer 10. We now know, we have empirical proof, evidence, that women have just as many sex partners as men do. What a revelation. What would cause that? I think we've got a good idea, don't we? This whole idea of women should be chaste and pure and all that bullshit. But we know that fact is bonobos have lots of sex, chimps have lots of sex, and quite frankly, humans have lots of sex. And in our recent evolutionary past, we've been having a bunch of sex. And it had nothing to do with what the Pope says should be monogamous sexuality. So, we now have answers to why our penis is shaped the way it is. It's a pump. We now have answers to why it lasts so long, 4 to 10 minutes. We now have answers why it's shaped so different from other primates and how effective it is. 80%, not bad. I mean, you're trying to win the game of getting to the egg. So, this kind of proves that we are a multi-mate species. And we've been a multi-mate species most of our evolutionary past. It also proves that we are a multi-mate species right now. And we know that sex in humans is for bonding. It's for recreation. If you think about it, sex, you will have one sex act, you'll have one baby for every 1,000 to 10,000 sex acts. Just think about that. And I'm including masturbation here. 1,000 to 10,000 sex acts for every baby produced. And with our day and age, there's lots of people choosing to not have babies at all. So that's like infinite. Yeah, every sex act you have is non-reproductive. That tells us that humans have repurposed sex. It also shows us how difficult it is to actually get pregnant. Now, unfortunately, in our modern day, it's easier for women to get pregnant than it was back in hunter-gatherer society days. and I write about this fairly extensively in the book, hunter-gatherers actually had a way to prevent pregnancy. And I'm not talking infanticide. I'm talking about nursing. When you nurse and keep your body fat at a certain level, your body will not get pregnant, which is a pretty darn good idea. If you're carrying a baby around and gathering fruits and nuts and roots and things, you really can't carry two babies around. So having one baby for about 4 years, nursing that baby for 4 years. I mean, some people say, well, you shouldn't be nursing your baby for 4 years. Well, that's bullshit. There's lots of cultures that nurse babies for 4 years. And, of course, a lot of those cultures are dead now, but there were cultures that did that, and it didn't seem to bother us as humans a bit. But as long as you're nursing and you're keeping the body fat at a certain level, you will not get pregnant again. It's dangerous to get another baby when you can't take care of the one you got. It's Mother Nature's way of saying, let this baby get big enough till it can take care of itself before we start having the next baby. But when you add the nutrients that we get as an agricultural society, and that's what we really are, then you get an infinite amount of calories. I mean, plenty of calories, and so you get pregnant much easier. The body's suppression system just doesn't work as well. So let's consider our friend the Pope that we haven't talked much about yet. When he tells you to have sex for reproduction only, he's telling you to have sex like my dog. This is my dog, Sugar. And she is just as sweet as she looks. She's the sweetest dog on the planet. I love Sugar. And we have a rule that if there's a dog in the picture, she has to be one of them. So this is Sugar. She mates only when she's in heat. Now, she's not mating at all because she's fixed. But if she were not fixed, she'd mate only when she was in heat. And she would get pregnant fairly easily. She could actually get pregnant virtually every time she was in heat. If we let them. Dogs do that. If you think about insects, insects may only be fertile once in their whole lifetime. You don't have the opportunity to miss. You better get the egg or you're gone genetically, never to be seen on the face of this planet again. And that's true of almost every other species on the planet. They're built to have sex once, be very successful, impregnate the female, get the egg, and get going. The female is built to be able to control who gets the egg. There was a study of 14 different water striders. I don't know if you got water striders here in Australia. They're little bugs. They're six-legged bugs that stride across the water. They can surface tension keeps them up there. And with one pond, there were 14 different species of water striders on one pond. Now, I have a big pond in my front yard, and there's always water striders of all different sizes. When they looked at the sex organs of the male, they found 14 different sex organs among these 14 different species of water striders. And these are striders that your naked eye, well, even with a microscope, you as an untrained eye would not be able to tell the difference between these 14 different water striders. They all look alike to us. But if you look at the male penis, or if you look inside the female reproductive tract, you would be able to identify the species just by that alone. So there's enormous amounts of change and evolution going on right there. And yet the Pope says you should only have sex for reproduction. Or you should only have sex to the person you're married to, period. Now, I dare say, how many of you know a monogamous person? Okay. Now, my question would be, unless it's you, how would you know? Now, if I ask the question, monogamy, and let's look at it the way Jesus talked about monogamy. Monogamy is one sex partner, married sex partner for life. And that's the way he defined it. That's the way St. Paul defined it. That's the way the Pope defines it. Marriage is one sex partner for life. I dare say you may not know a single person in your life that hasn't had two sex partners. And even if they say, oh no, I've always been monogamous, you won't know because they're lying to you. We just saw what the research from the University of Toronto showed. People lie, especially females, lie because that's what the culture says you should do. You should never admit to having the same number of sex partners as men have. That would make you a slut or something like that. And because we're into shaming females for acting like human beings. And that's really what religion does. And that's what the Pope's up to. If you have sex like the Pope tells you to do, you're having sex like an animal. You're having sex like an insect. And I think this is revolutionary. This is something we really need to push back on the religionists about. Is you're telling us to not act like humans. And yet that man right there would say, if you have sex with more than one person, if you have, sex in different ways, if you like doggy style or whatever, you are the pervert. And I'm saying, no, you're the pervert. That is perverted to expect humans to act like animals. And that's what you're acting like an animal when you only have sex with one person for whole life, and you only have sex in the missionary position once a month. I mean, that's just unnatural for humans. Most humans. Now, I'm not sitting up here and saying, well, that's your style, it's wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's not the style of most humans. If you chose that style and you chose it freely, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay is religion telling you everything else is wrong and causing guilt in you. So imagine a world without religion. Imagine age-appropriate, science-based sex education for all children. You've got better stuff going on here in Australia than we do in the United States, but you still have problems with the religion kind of injecting itself into the school chaplain bullshit. I mean, that is really crazy. Even we don't have that. But hope you get rid of it, by the way. Think about women's sexuality and their sex drive being seen as normal. Though there's nothing wrong with a woman having a sex drive equal to or greater than a man. But our culture says that's not permitted. And I don't care what culture you're in, whether all of Western culture, we still have elements of shaming, female shaming especially within our culture. And sexual orientation, not even noticed. That would be wonderful. Who gives a damn what your sexual orientation is? That's your orientation, not mine. I'm not forced to take your orientation. Women feel safe and don't have fear of being raped or minimized fear around that. There's no shaming for abortion. I've had so many women say, I feel so ashamed I had an abortion. I've been an atheist most of my life and I still feel ashamed I had an abortion. Well, that's bullshit. There's no reason to be ashamed if you had an abortion. That's a religious concept. And there's no stigma for being single. How many religions make you a second-class citizen if you're a single person? Or if you choose never to get married? They say, well, you're not a full human being if you're not married. And responsible sexual behavior is the norm, not some, responsible sexual behavior meaning using a condom, using birth control. I mean, in Africa right now, the Catholic Church is telling them condoms don't work and birth control is against God's law. That is perverted. That is crazy, shame-based behavior. Male sexuality is openly celebrated. Now, that would be interesting. Pornography is seen as normal, and no priests or ministers are molesting children. I mean, that's a world without religion. If you eliminate religion, you create all these things I just suggested. Now I want to talk about a specific aspect of sexuality, and that's masturbation. Now people tell me, Darrel, you talk a lot about masturbation. What's your problem? Well, I'm the best sex partner I've ever had in my life. I was the first sex partner I ever had in my life. I may be the last sex partner I ever had in my life. If I can't like me, then I'm probably going to be pretty lousy as a sex partner. This is true of both genders. And I want us to get over this idea that masturbation is in some way a shame-based thing, or it's wrong, it's abnormal, it's all crazy. Male masturbation is actually a biological imperative. Guys, you must masturbate, and you must masturbate at least every 5 days. Here's why. Sperm only lasts about 5 days. Then they start becoming senile. They don't know which way to go when they get out. So, you don't want to have senile sperm, because if you're trying to get the egg, you're going to lose. You got to keep them fresh. It also keeps the pipes clean. Keeps the old prostate working really well. Guys, the research shows high degrees of sex and masturbation keeps the prostate, reduces or minimizes prostate cancer. So jack off, guys. Get going. All right. Female.
I would, but I heard it's a real handful.
Yeah, that was wrong. That was really wrong. Female masturbation. I've had so many women tell me, and as a psychologist, I've been in the office with women say, I'm ashamed of masturbating. I'm ashamed to tell my husband or my boyfriend that I masturbate. Well, you know, ladies, if you can't masturbate, if you can't feel comfortable with your own body, how do you expect them to? I've had many women come and say, I've never had an orgasm in my life. You know what I ask? Guess what the first question I ask them is? How often do you masturbate? And too often they say, oh, I never masturbate. Okay, you don't know how to give your own self an orgasm, yet you expect your boyfriend to give you an orgasm. This is not rational. This is irrational behavior. Go back and start masturbating. Find out what your body needs, what it likes, what causes orgasm in you, and then teach your husband, teach your boyfriend what that is. Because they're not going to be able to read your mind. They don't know your body better than you know your own body. So, masturbation relieves stress in women, and there's a lot of cool research that has just come out about female orgasms. So we've known a lot about male orgasms for a long time. We know it relieves stress. We know it lets you get to sleep. We know it keeps the pipes fresh and the inventory clean. But female orgasm has its own benefits, by the way. It helps you get to sleep, of course. So a little pleasure can go a long way. A recent survey of 1,800 women found that over 30% of them use sexual release as a natural sedative. They go to sleep easier. I figured that out when I was 12 years old, and I'm thinking a lot of gals did too, but they can't admit it. The other thing it does is it keeps the blood flowing. Women who masturbate a lot literally have healthier vaginal tracts because you keep better circulation through the vaginal tract, and it reduces disease. Because when you get better blood flow, you have better immune responses to things. And it also makes you more responsive. People who masturbate, whether male or female, actually become more responsive because you're in touch with your own body. And that's what the beauty of female masturbation is. It keeps you in touch and gets you in touch with your own body. Another research that came out in Science News in December of 2004 said that animals that produce sperm continuously, such as man, the implications seem to be that the more frequent ejaculations serve both to remove older and thus less viable sperm, as well as to reduce the damage to sperm cells during storage. You don't want to have old sperm next to new sperm. You know, it's like a bad apple. It kind of spreads. So there's real problems with not getting rid of it. Unfortunately, Christian sex says that's not right. And we've allowed Christianity to dominate our views of human sexuality. And I think we need to start defining it for ourselves. We shouldn't be letting them, any other religious group, tell us what is shameful and what we should be ashamed of, what's right and wrong, what's normal. What we've already seen is the Pope doesn't know what human sexuality is about. He doesn't have a clue. Remember, he's never had sex. Think about that.
Says it.
And another fellow that gets off way too easy, I think, is the Dalai Lama. That sucker has never had sex either. And yet he says gay sex is wrong. He says anything but penis and vagina sex is wrong. That's the Dalai Lama's view. So if you're giving Dalai Lama credit for being some liberal Buddhist, he's not. He's as conservative as our friend the Pope. And he has similar beliefs to sexuality about the Pope. So if you don't have sex, you can really make up a lot of shit and tell all your parishioners and all your people in your religion about it. So the reason I wrote Sex and God was to help us get over the residual effects of religion. I've had atheists, lifelong atheists, come to me clinically and say, I still can't believe I'm ashamed of this part of my body, or I'm ashamed to do this sex act, or I'm ashamed to masturbate or something. And they've been an atheist all over. Where did you get that idea? You question them a little bit and they say, you know, it came from my grandma, or it came from my mom, or it came from my Aunt Anna, or something like that. I watched when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my youngest brother was like 8 months old. I watched my grandmother change his diapers. Now, any infant, we even know babies in the womb still touch themselves. My brother reached down and touched his penis. What did my grandmother do? She slapped his penis away. Now, this is an 8-month-old child.
His hand.
In other words, slapped his penis. I said his hand. Thank you. Yeah, that would have been even worse, wouldn't it? Yeah, no, let's not do that. Slapped his hand away. Now, think about that. That is a sexual lesson that starts at 8 months old. If you don't think we've been perverted by our culture, just look at how your grandparents and your parents thought about sex and sexuality. You probably got some of that inside of you, even if you don't know it. And I want to challenge that as I want us to think about, how is our sexuality expressed? What things are we carrying around? Why do we behave the way we are? And I want us to start celebrating positive natural sexuality, and I want to build a framework for atheist, freethinker, secular sexuality. And I want to encourage you to be open and proud about your sexuality. Now, do you guys get, Jeff Foxworthy, you might be a redneck if. You ever heard that one? You might be a redneck if this or that. It's more of an American hillbilly redneck kind of a thing, of course. Well, I'm going to show you.
A bogan.
Huh?
A bogan.
A bogan in Australia.
Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go. Thank you. So here's what you might be. You might be a redneck, just substitute Christian. You might be a Christian atheist if you feel guilty about masturbating. You might be a Christian atheist if you feel shame about enjoying pornography. You might be a Christian atheist if you have difficulty talking to your own children about sex and sexuality. You might be a Christian atheist if you have difficulty talking to your spouse or partner about sexual fantasies you would like to try. Now, I'm not saying they have to participate. I'm saying if you can't even talk about it, something's wrong. And I'm guaranteeing it came from religion. You might be a Christian atheist if you feel disgust around normal sexual activities. You might be a Christian atheist especially if you shame women about their sexuality. Slut shaming is a fundamentally religious activity. And when I see atheists doing this, it just pisses me off. Why are we shaming anybody about their sexuality? And I see atheists online, especially online where they're anonymous, saying horrible things that have nothing to do with the argument, injecting sexual ideas into arguments that have nothing to do with sex. That shows the depth of programming that we have from our religiosity. So I'm not a Christian, and I don't need to act like one. I certainly am not acting like one up here today. I am a secular sexual, and I'm proud of it. So what I want to do is create a meme of secular sexuality, and I want us to start thinking about what does it mean to be a secular sexual. All right? I'm not taking anything else. I think we should be proud of who we are. And I love the gay community for that very thing. The gay community has decided they are proud of their sexuality. They're not going to let anybody tell them what they can and can't do, what they should and should not be ashamed about. And I think the rest of us should take a lesson from the gay community. They're not letting anybody else define them. And as an atheist, I'm not letting anybody define me sexually. And I don't care what I want to do as long as it's consensual between adults, and it's legal and in the broader sense of the word, then what's wrong with it? I don't think we should be kowtowing to religious notions of sex and sexuality. So I'm a sex-positive atheist. I'm proud of it. I'm a secular sexual. And I particularly want to emphasize one thing here that I've not mentioned before, and that is male shame. We've talked a lot about female shame, but male shame doesn't get talked about at all. In fact, you may not have even thought about male shame and their sexuality. But as males, we carry a lot of shame around in us. And you can see it very clearly in other religious communities besides the Christian community. You can see it especially in Islam and Hinduism. Because male shame is wound up with control of women. And the essence of Islam, the essence of Hinduism, and the essence of much of Christianity is men should control women. If women act out sexually, it reflects back on the man. If my daughter is caught, if I'm a Muslim and my daughter is caught kissing a boy, I'm obligated to punish her, chop her head off, kill her myself, exile her from the community or something. I mean, we see this and we just are shocked with horror about how Islam treats women. And yet it hasn't been that long ago Christians were doing the same thing. I mean, what's the book, The Scarlet Letter, all about? It's about shaming women and the man getting off scot-free. And you see this in literature. Women are being shamed, men get off scot-free all too often. If you feel, here's my point, guys. If there's anything about you that feels you must control the women around you, whether it's your wife, your daughter, your girlfriend, your sister, then you have bought into this shaming culture that religion's taught us. Whether you're religious or not is irrelevant. That still exists. And I want to challenge we men into thinking about, how do we still buy into this shame? It is a shame for me if my females don't obey me or the cultural norms around female sexual behavior. Well, I've enjoyed talking with you tonight. I hope this has been enlightening and giving you some things to talk about. I'll be happy to sign some books afterwards. And I guess we're going to go out and have a beer together. If you're buying, I'm going. So, thanks a lot.